From Flourish DX, this is the Psych Health and Safety Podcast. With workplace mental health becoming a safety prerogative, this is the source of information on psychological injury prevention and health promotion.
Hi, and welcome to the Psych Health and Safety Podcast. My name is Jason and I'm one of the hosts of the show. The aim of the podcast is to rapidly increase the knowledge and application of psychological health and safety in workplaces worldwide. To help with this, we have regular guests from around the world who are leading the way in this important area. But before I introduce our guest and topic for today, allow me to introduce my co-host, Joelle Mitchell. How did Joelle?
Oh, I'm all right.
Just all right?
Yeah, just all right.
It's Monday morning. How can you not be, amazing?
Someone once told me that I'm like Garfield.
Or Daria.
Well,
you hate Mondays.
The Garfield of mornings was... So not just Mondays, but mornings.
Mornings.
Generally, was how I was described.
So it's not restricted to Mondays?
No, Mondays might be worse.
Yeah.
I did get woken up quite early yesterday as well, which is usually my day for sleeping in, so that wasn't great.
Yeah. I think Ronan should get into more team sports and then you'll never have a sleep in again in your life, like me.
Just because you have a miserable life doesn't mean I have to.
It sounds miserable. I just said I've got some early mornings so I don't get sleep-ins. Sleep-ins would be nice.
Sounds miserable.
But Joelle Mitchell, it would be this is some sort of hell, having to get up before 8 a.m. on a Saturday.
No.
Oh, well, look, hopefully a coffee or two picks you up today then.
Yeah, I've had my coffee. If I have any more, then I get jittery and it goes wrong in a different direction.
Yeah, okay. Well, I think you're going to enjoy the conversation today.
I'm sure I will.
Yeah. So we have a guest in from Melbourne, so I should probably introduce him.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So this person has over 20 years of experience working in a range of health, safety and wellbeing leadership roles across complex industries and organisations. He's currently Director of Health, Safety and Wellbeing at Australian Red Cross Lifeblood. Welcome to the podcast, David Savio.
Brilliant. Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
And great to have you, mate. So it wasn't long ago, I think it was only a couple of weeks ago, we had dinner in Melbourne and I floated the idea of you coming on the podcast and sharing some of the things that you shared with me over dinner. So thank you for taking me up on it.
Yeah, well, we'll see how I feel about that after the podcast. But feeling very intimidated, but here we go. Thank you.
No need. I've heard from yourself that, some of your team listen to the podcast too, which is great. So thanks for sharing it with your team. So hopefully they don't mind hearing their boss on this and are quite supportive.
Yeah, well, I look forward to it. And really looking forward to the conversation. And really for me, it's a topic I'm quite passionate about. So, yeah, far away.
Awesome.
All right. Well, to kick off, as you know, what are your favourite podcasts?
Yes, well, I do have three. Three podcasts. Of course, this is top of the podcast list. And I say that genuinely because I've really enjoyed the calibre of presenters that you've had. And you've got people like Brian Long, Clive Lloyd and Dave Burrows. And just the influence that they've had on the lens that I have for this topic on psychological health and safety has been quite impactful. And I do feel intimidated by that because they're a very hard act to follow, particularly Dave Burrows. But the other one really I really enjoy is the Safety of Work podcast, and you may be aware of that, and that's with Dave Proven and Drew Ray. And it's a bit of it, I guess it's showing the geek in me, but I really enjoy their review of publications and just being able to unpack that science behind the work and what works and what doesn't in the world of work. And that inspires me really to be quite curious and critical about my thinking professionally. And I guess personally, the other podcast is Science with Dr. Karl. And growing up, I just loved and was amazed by anything that Dr. Karl had to say or show, and filled with practical experiments showcasing the weird and wonderful world of science. And so there you go. Really enjoy a combination of those.
It's a very nerdy list you've got there, David. I love it. And for international listeners who may not be familiar with Dr. Karl.
Well, I mean, Dr. Karl, For those of you who don't know, Dr. Carl was actually recognised by Harvard University for research into belly button lint and why it's almost always blue. So for those of you, regardless if you're international or not, sweat helps the blue diffuse from the cotton. So I don't know how much research went into that, but anything Dr. Carl had to say, really enjoyed listening to.
Yeah, if you can make belly button interesting, I guess you should be doing podcasting.
Yeah, he does talks at my son's school every now and then as well. So I think he's probably one of Australia's most well-known science educators, sort of in the
probably hardest working as well.
Yeah, definitely. But yeah, he's been around forever. But he's always fun to listen to as well, which is important when it comes to talking about science.
And getting kids excited about it.
Or just the general population.
This is true.
Can you tell us about your professional career, please, David?
Yeah, sure. Well, look, before I launch into the nuts and bolts of my professional career, look, I grew up on a happy farm actually, and that was in the southeastern suburbs of Melbourne, and that's as a first-generation Australian. And my dad's from Italy and mum's from Scotland. And growing up on the farm, I think when I reflect back, really has shaped a lot of who I am and what I stand for, both personally and professionally. And my dad would work away for long periods of time. And as the oldest, I was taught to drive our old girl, Massey Ferguson, as a 10-year-old. And each day after school, I'd be feeding the cattle and working the weekends to look after the land. So growing up on the farm, I really enjoyed the value of being a generalist. And so I look at my role as a safety professional now, and I can see how being a jack of all trades and just being able to know how to support family and local community plays a strong thread through my career. But look, I started my career in an operational context. So that was working in offshore oil and gas, and that was at the age of 19. So I spent 7 years predominantly working in various operational roles within that oil and gas industry. When I wasn't working on those projects, I was really working a range of roles like retail, construction worker, pool plasterer, landscape gardener, you name it. So I've sort of done 7 different careers in my life. And while I was working offshore, and this was in Bass Strait, connecting the gas line between Tasmania and Victoria. I commenced my Bachelor in Applied Science, and it was at that point that I think I chose that degree because I liked the aspect of it being generalist, and I didn't really know what I wanted to do. So it was a combination of getting into some study and in something that I enjoyed, but being generalist to keep options open. And I really did look forward to getting back onto land because I had the privilege of having David Parkin and Professor Mark Hargraves as the lecturers. So I really enjoyed that idea of learning from the best. And I chose sports science because I always had an interest in human performance and just being able to understand how to get the best out of individuals and teams and in a club environment. So I feel that experience has really crafted a thread through my career as well. And I'm the type of person, by the way, that enjoys the analytics of sport rather than the theatre of sport. So, and I'm a Hawthorn supporter, so I get a range of emotions through that, but the analytics is the part that I enjoy. And during my studies, I landed my first corporate gig. So this is going back quite a while now, but my first corporate gig was in the field of occupational rehabilitation, and that was it started really working with people with disabilities and impairment and helping them get back to work. And for listeners who've worked in that field, it's being able to understand from a human-centred design perspective and being able to negotiate with employers to be able to design work that enables disadvantaged groups to be able to get back to work and enter a new workforce for many situations. So that career really helped me with my perspective around social justice, equality and inclusion, and just being able to know how to influence the design of work to help with mutual benefit, really, for people and an organisation. During that time, I was introduced to the term biopsychosocial. Now, I've got to tell you this was back in 2004 that I very first time I'd heard that term. So I was very much amazed and really enjoyed the research by Wendy MacDonald and later Jodie Oakman, just around understanding the impact of biopsychosocial factors on the recovery at work and then the causation of musculoskeletal disorders and injuries. And at that idea, I had absolutely no idea that it would shape another 20 years of my career and fascination with that space. And I guess then my interest in work health and safety really started to flow on from there. And I could see the impact that, thinking upstream and influencing the design of work had on people. And I was really curious about how I could influence that on a larger scale. And then I commenced my postgrad studies in safety, so into the arena of occupational health and safety formally, where I was lucky enough to be with amazing people like Leo Roshena and Susan Tebby, and that was at RMIT. And I guess when I was studying at RMIT, I remember feeling a little bit out of place because at the time, a lot of the units were heavily focused on physical hazards. And of course, I was really curious around the psychological aspects of work. And so for me, when I was completing my studies there, I was really trying to crave the learning around the physical environment, but also want to nurture the passion I had around psychological aspects of work. I was lucky enough there to gain employment with an employer association while I was studying, and I was able to work with Mario Machado and Tracy Brown, who in the industry were really significant around policy making in an employer context. And there I had the opportunity to be part of a number of tripartite parties, in fact, looking at policy for work health and safety. And at that time, it was around 2008, COAG had just signed the agreement to make the model work health and safety laws. So I was really, really lucky to be knees deep in supporting consultation process throughout that time. And, work health and safety due diligence was big on the agenda of a lot of employers. So I had the opportunity to be working with boards and executives and influencing, upstream. So the topic then, when I had started to finish my studies, I was looking at a research report, and I was lucky enough to do a research report on work health and safety governance on small to medium enterprises. So I was just really enjoying this world of being able to have an impact at a more scalable level and be able to look at influencing, the upstream side of things. So from there, I worked in healthcare and had worked with a large a private hospital network. And that was another interesting learning opportunity for me professionally, because I was in an environment that was private equity and then it'd be listed as well. So from a work health and safety point of view, I really learned about the art of being able to demonstrate strong value proposition. And it was in that environment where I realised I needed to build my skills in financial management. So I completed the Masters in Business Administration while I was working there. And that really helped me understand then, okay, well, there are people at the heart of work that we do, and they have all range of health impacts that enable them to thrive, or they might be struggling, and work has a significant role. And here I am in a position where I'm able to then influence that, but also speak the language that the executive and board might be talking. I then worked in emergency services, and then since that time, I've been very fortunate enough to be in the role at Lifeblood, where I've been here for 4 years.
It's a long and winding road, David, but I can see it all kind of heading towards that point, like you say, going upstream and really having that influence at scale where you're actually able to design work that's good for people and help promoting at the end of the day.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I guess in and amongst all that, I do find time to really just enjoy that balance with family and give back to the community through coaching. So I do coaching, director of coaching at a community soccer club, and of course I keep bees and look after my bonsais. So
And how does the soccer club like you using the term soccer rather than football?
Oh, well, in Australia, I don't confuse it with the AFL code. So there you go.
Yeah, you're a Carlton supporter, aren't you, David?
Hawthorn.
Sorry, you mentioned Hawthorn before. Sorry.
That's all right. But
No, I can't remember why I thought Carlton. But anyway, they had their first finals win, right, for a while. So that's pretty exciting for Carlton.
And Hawthorn's had lots of theirs fair share, so I've enjoyed that as well.
Look, they finished above West Coast this year. We'll just put it that way. Hawthorn. But they look good towards the end of the season. You're up for, the next few years looks brighter than West Coast, that's for sure. Hey, David, so over dinner the other night, I was really interested to hear some of your thought processes that went behind the strategy of how you're implementing psych health and safety. So you're, a few years into actually progressing something, which is, really probably ahead of 99% of organisations in Australia. So kudos to you for starting before it was, the shiny new thing that many people see now. So we know that not every organisation is the same. We do talk to some organisations that are like, what's the framework that we follow, or where do we start and how do we progress? But what really struck me was, what you're thinking about is strategically, what do we need to do now to get to a point where we need to be in the next year, 2, 3 year kind of thing. So I found that quite interesting, and I thought for our listeners, actually hearing someone who's actually been working in this area for a while now, more than most, but then just thinking hearing about some of the thinking patterns that went behind the strategy that you've got, I thought that they would really benefit from. So thanks for sharing. But before we get too far into it, I thought what we might do is start with a bit of context setting. So for those, particularly internationally, that aren't aware of Lifeblood, maybe you can let us know a bit about what the organisation is all about.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Well, look, it's got to all be sustainable, right? So I think as an organisation, look, Lifeblood, at its heart, its purpose is simple and powerful. So for Lifeblood, it's about life-giving donations for life-changing outcomes. And with that, we have a workforce of 3,700 employees, and that's supported by 1,500 vital volunteers. So we're not a small organisation, and we're a little bit smaller than some other organisations I've worked in. But throughout Australia, we do have a network of 97 static and mobile donor centres, so people might be familiar with going into those centres. And that's we really enable the collection of blood and plasma donations, and that's supported then by 4 major blood processing centres, and that they're scattered throughout Australia. And look, we're more than just the collecting of blood. We do process and provide donated milk for preterm babies, and we supply microbiota for transplant and clinical trials, and that's within our TGA-approved site in Perth. And we have a national call centre, and that does a lot of the engagement with the community and hospitals, etc. And we have a world-leading R&D team. So whilst as an organisation, we are quite complex in the work that we do, and our people and its facilities are only part of the picture, and it's really the unrelenting passion to help people in need and drive that really drives us every day, and the generosity of people in our community to give life-giving donations for the life-changing outcomes. So I feel really proud to be working in this organisation and privileged, not only because it's an amazing organisation, but I'm supported by an amazing executive and board that really believes in what we're trying to do and the support that we're trying to cultivate for our people.
Well, you're definitely not killing baby seals there, right? It's definitely an organisation with a mission that you can get behind, right? If you can't find meaning and purpose in that, then you probably shouldn't be there. But tell us then, you've got an organisation of employees that's 3,700 and like you say, volunteers as well on top of that. What's the size of your health and safety team then and composition of that to support the organisation?
Yeah, okay. So, look, I support a team of 9. So we have a mix of, we have 3 business partners of health and safety, and we have 2 injury management or injury support specialists. We have a manager of health and injury support, and that really spearheads our workers' compensation as well. And we have a manager of health and wellbeing, and we obviously look at our systems and processes. So we have a more centralised role there that looks at systems and programs manager for health, safety and wellbeing. So our team, I think they really punch above their weight. We support non-work related and work-related injuries within the team, and we look at the broad realm of promotion, health promotion, prevention and mitigation. So really proud of the work we've done. We've shifted in our focus from not just compliance to look at how do we partner, how do we work within the organisational context as a trusted business partner to enable them to be able to deliver the work that they do, mindful of the important role of health, safety and wellbeing and that impact.
That's great to hear. We don't want to just be about injury prevention, but, good work is good for people, both physically and mentally. But sometimes work isn't good for us. So what are the main psychosocial and physical hazards that you've identified? Obviously, it's a pretty diverse workforce and, the types of work that people are doing is different. But what are the key hazards that you guys are keen to mitigate?
Well, look, the ones we're laser focused on, that we have an enterprise risk register that earmarks a broad range of areas, but biological hazards is one key one. So we've got hazardous substances, we've got physical loading, we've got a physical environment, so people moving around, we have members of the public, the interface, by and large, we have really well-practiced systems and controls in place that prevent our loss of control for our physical environment. So that I feel quite privileged. My predecessor, Rod Moore and Nan Austin, both before me, they did an amazing job setting the foundation, a really good foundation for me to work on and the team to carry forward. I think that the main area around psychosocial risks is really where we're putting a lot of our focus and energy to not only, we're fortunate because we're not starting from scratch, but we're really recognising in a more sophisticated way that this is something that needs to be front and centre. And for me, it sits on our enterprise risk register. So psychological health and safety sits on there with a particular focus around psychosocial hazards.
Yeah, terrific.
So, as Jason said earlier, we're going to sort of get into the detail of what you've been doing, where you're up to and sort of what's coming next. To get us started with that though, what have you set as sort of the overall goal of your psychosocial risk management program?
All right. Well, we have had a strategic focus for some time, so I will talk about that. But what we have recognised, and I'm really proud of this, is that for Lifeblood to continue doing its life-giving work, it must take as a priority the care for those people employed to do that life-giving work. So that has to be front and centre. And, for us, the people are the heart of everything we do. And we recognise that, for a person, part of their overall well-being is going to be aspects of their work. And Lifeblood is in charge of that and can affect that. So when we look at things from a strategy point of view, we are mainly focused on three key areas. And one is looking at human-centered design. So we want to make sure that we design work with humans at the center of that experience, because ultimately, if we're going to be asking our people to be delivering on our purpose, we need to ensure that they understand and are able to deliver on that work in a way that's going to be of mutual benefit. The second thing is we're focused on highly effective teams, because in a social context, we need to ensure that we place trust in one another, that we're able to collaborate and dive into challenging conversations. As an organisation, there is a risk when you're purpose-focused to be in a benevolent space and hypercare. So we're conscious of the importance of leaning into challenging conversations, and that But that also includes making sure that we express gratitude and compassion for one another as well. So it's balancing compassion and accountability. And then the third one is around meaningful work, because we all want to focus on the work that matters. And there are finite resources. There aren't finite resources. So focusing on work that's aligned with our purpose and where we can, where possible, reduce pain points and unnecessary bureaucracy is where we want to focus on, so that our people are able to get the best out of themselves. It's a little bit similar to, I take the sporting analogy, you can have a superstar in your side, it might be the Buddy Franklin when he was at Hawthorn. But you can have the superstar in the side, but if you don't have the team around them or the facilities or the leadership or the game plan or all that comes with high-performing environment, how can you possibly expect someone like a Buddy Franklin to be able to deliver on their potential and in a sustainable way and enable the team to be able to get success at the same time? So for us, it's making sure we're focused on what is important to our people to deliver on our purpose and to be able to enable us to do that together and to be able to do that in a way that we focus on what's meaningful.
Yeah, can you give us some examples of what the sort of good work design looks like for your workforce?
Yeah, so look, for many of us, it's around understanding the polarity of work. So if you look at, for example, in a donor centre, we will have people come into our workplace. There will be a big focus around customer service and being able to ensure donors get the right experience. And then there'll be also aspects of that work that's quite clinically focused. So making sure that we're able to have people move through that process so we can obviously get the product that we need. And so with that, if we are adding layers in that system of work that isn't contributing or adding any value, so it might be getting them to do a checklist of things that aren't directly contributing to one or two of those things, because we think it's something, we think as in a corporate context or other contexts might think it's something that needs to be done, that becomes a polarity for those that have to do the work. So do they focus their time on the customer, the donor? Do they focus their time on the importance of the phlebotomy and making sure that the needle goes in correctly? Or do we focus on all the peripheral stuff that they've then been asked to do? So for us, it's about making sure we understand the work and the variability of that work, and where there is work that isn't adding value, that we can try and remove that.
Yeah, I think that's probably a universal example, really. Obviously you're talking about needles and phlebotomy, which is very specific, but that I think that general approach is broadly applicable everywhere. And I think anybody who's ever worked anywhere can think of examples of, tasks that they're asked to do that don't actually necessarily contribute to good quality productivity, whatever that might look like.
Yeah, and just, you think about work and how work can bring about frustration, and how you think about the emotional load that work brings about, or the cognitive load. And so all these bits add up. And I think for us, we recognise that while we do have physical related injuries, so like musculoskeletal, we do appreciate that it's musculoskeletal is not just about the physical task, but it is also about the accumulative load that supports around that in addition to that. And it could be things like those pain points, frustration, the emotional load. I mean, you think about any time someone puts on a uniform for our work, there's an emotional load to that. And so I'm sure there's other industries as well where they would have a similar sort of emotional load that's carried. So us trying to understand that and ensure we're curious about work and the design of work and the effect that can have on people is really important. And that's mission critical. The challenge is how you do that.
Yeah. like Joelle said, some pretty universal things there, right? And it goes to show, you don't need to be an organizational psychologist to have an impact. You just need to be empathetic and compassionate as a leader and go, well, how can I remove obstacles or frustrations? How can we focus on the meaningful work rather than the stuff that is just bureaucracy, as you say?
Yeah. And look, there is both to all of that. So we do look at ways in which we can equip our people with the skills that they need. So for us, it's around the leadership capability and making sure leaders have the confidence and the capability to be able to recognise the variability of work, know when and how to lean into that, sometimes with the challenging conversations, but to manage their polarity as well, around the top down and bottom up. So all of that is an accumulative load that sits within an organisational context. So for us, we are trying really, really hard it makes sense to appreciate that, but to methodically work your way through that is where we're really focused now.
Hi listeners, Jason here. We hope you're enjoying this latest podcast episode. Now, if you're like Joelle, Alicia and myself and enjoy learning from the best, then the Flourish DX Academy is for you. The Academy includes free e-learning courses on the ISO 45003 standard for psychological health and safety at work, and associated topics such as how to conduct a psychosocial risk assessment and how to create the business case for psych health and safety. All courses feature high-quality videos, downloadable resources, multi-choice questions, and a downloadable training certificate on completion. Take your learning to the next level with all Flourish DX Academy courses included within the Flourish DX mobile app. Select podcast episodes from the Psych Health and Safety podcast and sister podcasts from Canada and the USA are also included. Get started with Flourish DX for free at www.flourishdx.com/get-started. That's www.flourishdx.com/get-started. Now back to this episode. So David, obviously you've been doing bits and pieces in the psychosocial risk management space for a number of years now. And I'd like to kind of just, hear from you, I guess, how you've been progressing that agenda. But I guess to start with, where did you start? So when you said, hey, look, we really recognise that psychosocial risks, do play, an important part in people's health and well-being, like our physical risks, in our collection centres, for example. So recognising that, where did you decide to start the journey and why?
Yeah, well, I started with Lifeblood in October 2019, so we all know what happened shortly thereafter that. But look, prior to 2019, Lifeblood made significant investment in the physical environment, automation, redesign of workplace layout, engineering of equipment, all those sorts of things. So we were, however, still seeing people present at work with injuries, and by the majority they were musculoskeletal, when we take the lion's share of the type of injury profile we see. And so I took a deep dive into what data we had in that context, and I also looked at it from a qualitative point of view. So we set up semi-structured interviews to really just try and understand that a little bit more. And so just to give you the listeners a sense of what we're talking about, so 83% of our incidents involved some work-related musculoskeletal disorder, right? So that's the lion's share of them. We found that around 65% of those involved, they weren't frank tasks. So we involved gradual onset type injuries. So something, points where we couldn't quite put our finger on what had actually caused that incident. And we then found that almost 95% of those involved some associated psychosocial factor. And that had been amplified as part of their recovery at work as well. So we were seeing that there was more to it. And when I had the conversation with our executive and board, what was on our enterprise risk register was manual handling. And so my objective early on was to try and shift the language and the understanding around the causation. And so we presented the information to the board, and I'd used, I mentioned it a little bit earlier, but the model proposed by Wendy McDonald. And Wendy McDonald with Jody Oakman looked at a simplified composite model for workplace musculoskeletal disorder. And I chose that model because it resonated with the problem that we were faced with. And that is that we were seeing symptoms of musculoskeletal disorder. We couldn't quite label what factors were contributing or causing those. So that model helped our executive and board understand that there's more to look at and understand. And for those of you who may not be familiar with that model, it looks at workplace factors as a composition of like physical load and organisational factors and psychosocial context. And then it looks at that in context of the individual factors, and the individual's made up of all the complexities, natural complexities that you'd expect. And when you have a poor match between the two, there are resultant effects, and those resultant effects can be biological and physiological changes. And, given the sports science background, I could see clearly the logic behind all that. So you have someone that's under high stress, they don't have great coping skills, and you have these work demands that are disproportionate to their ability to cope through our own design. That's not a great match. And its likely resultant effect is going to manifest itself in a physical or psychological aspect. And so it was really about teasing that out, and that model was a game changer for our senior leaders. And look, I recall a conversation that we had, and the breakthrough moment for our executive was when one of them said, look, we're really skilled at identifying physical risks compared to those psychosocial risks. And they said, look, we can look at a piece of equipment and identify a hazard when it's physical. And, they'd seen this all the time, particularly biological hazards. But we need to be better at identifying the non-visible hazards that include, impact, fatigue, stress and injury. And it was just the fact that they were able to express that, knowing with intention that it was part of the causation of the symptom they were seeing. So it really it helped me to be able to create a language that hadn't been used in our organisation around psychosocial factors. And so we simply just changed that language to be workplace factors, because our leaders were saying, well, these are things that are happening around us, and they're things that people are doing, so they're not hidden anymore. The demands of work are visible, they're not invisible. And some of them are harder to find. Clearly, emotional demands and cognitive demands might be a bit trickier, but certainly the decision-making around the allocation of tasks and the rostering of tasks and workload is something we could see. So we look, I was really pleased because the board and executive immediately signed off a capacity for us to review our organisational health, safety and wellbeing policy, to then include a proactive focus on psychosocial hazards. So that was introduced into our policy. And the organisation committed to the rollout of the people at work and the Affirm toolkit. So Affirm toolkit is it's called a participative hazard identification and risk management toolkit, so Affirm. And also introduce a bespoke type of toolkit, which we end up partnering with Monash University, so Di Shepherd out at Monash University and MedHealth. And our organisation made a commitment that we're going to try to see how these tools at the time could work in our organisational context. So my team simply worked with each of those 8 sites. I guess from that process, we've learnt a lot. We've learned a lot that there are tools, but there are also limitations to tools. And I think on reflection, I think the tools have been valuable. We use those tools in more the local site context as opposed to the whole organisation. But we've found that there is a significant resource investment required to facilitate those tools, whether it be the people at work, whether it be a firm, or whether you're sort of bespoking, a sort of survey tool that helps collect insights around psychosocial hazards and then co-designing of controls. We've found that there's been a significant investment from our team to be able to do that. And then we've also found, from a leadership capability point of view, how do we make this sustainable? So how do we ensure that other leaders and other sites across our organisation can also realise this benefit? And so that's where we really sit from that. And from then it's been an opportunity to really look more from a systems point of view. So how do we mature our systems?
David, I reckon that's probably one of the best explanations I've heard of the link between musculoskeletal disorder and psychosocial hazard exposure. So I think that might be one of the clips that we pull out and share on LinkedIn. I think that'd be really beneficial for our listeners, particularly those that work in, industries where there is, high incidence of musculoskeletal disorders, like healthcare, for example, right? Yeah, absolutely. So that's, really interesting and to hear that journey, and awesome to hear, how you're able to take your board on that journey with you as well. And what were the arguments that you found convincing? So we'll definitely link to, the models that you're referencing here as well that kind of help to shape the conversation and get the board on the same page as you. So I guess you've tried out a number of tools. You've, discovered some of the limitations of those tools. So what's kind of like the next piece of work that you did to start progressing your agenda around psychosocial risk management?
Yeah. Well, I mentioned to you, for me, it's around how do we make all this sustainable? So for us, we look, I think it's really important that we get some visibility around the maturity of our system that we have in place to be able to support that. So working with Flourish DX, we commissioned a gap analysis. And the idea behind that was for us to understand, I felt we were doing the right thing. I felt it was quite piecemeal. And I really wanted to look at litmus testing where we stack up from a systems point of view. So we wanted to know where we sat and what's required for us to be able to mature that. And we also looked in the context of the gap analysis, how we stacked up against the work health and safety regulations and the code of practice. So in essence, that's what we set out to do. And what I like about that is that the model that we looked to use as part of the gap analysis was looking at the integrated model around workplace mental health, which for us, the Thrive at Work is sort of where I'd looked at that model, and we'd actually started back in 2019 looking at our strategic work plan and the drivers to be aligned to that. So things like promote, thrive, prevent harm and mitigate, or we use proactive care. But fundamentally, it's an integrated model. And so the gap analysis tool and methodology that we looked at was testing us against that and maturity against that.
So without going into detail about your own results from that gap analysis, what was your intention? Like, obviously you had a reason for doing the gap analysis. What did you intend to do, and how did you use the information from that to kind of progress your strategy?
Yeah, well, like any good gap analysis, we really were able to identify areas that we were proficient. So it sort of validated for me that we were on the right track, and it identified areas where we had opportunity to start to address those 3 areas I mentioned to you around making sure we have meaningful work and making sure we're integrated around our diversity, equity and inclusion roadmap and so on and so forth. So there's lots that we're doing within our organisation and within P&C. And the objective that I was looking at is I didn't really want the gap analysis, the product of that, to be something the health, safety and wellbeing team took away and then put in a work plan and chugged away at the next 1 to 2 years to try and deliver on an impact. So we presented the results of the gap analysis to the people and culture leadership team. And I'm very fortunate to be in a really high-performing team of people and culture professionals. And we discussed the opportunities to mature our Lifeblood's approach to workplace mental health. And we took the opportunity to present the report with an awareness and training session, because my team and I had been on this journey and been progressing along, and we wanted to make sure that people were connected to our motivation and the journey we're on. So we took the opportunity to have a workshop that looked at the gap analysis report and its findings and discussed that in context of the current initiatives that we're working on in our organisation. So we found that there's already lots happening in the space of psychological health and safety, and we found that there was an opportunity to link that across the people and culture business unit. So my objective was to first have an appreciation that there's a common goal, and then secondly, discuss what our appetite is. So our risk appetite is for each of the three sort of best practice areas, so the integrated model, and what level of intensity as a people and culture business unit we wanted to have in shaping the system of work across our organisation. So what do I mean by that? Like if you take, for example, psychosocial hazards or, the risk management in that context, does that mean we're going to go off and do risk assessments at every single centre? Or does that mean we're going to do one risk assessment across the whole organisation? Well, I think it's really important, if we're, again, to be sustainable, that we're thinking of having this in an integrated way. So what my team went off to do was put a draft risk appetite statement around each of those areas, and we've brought that back to the people and culture leadership team, and we've all endorsed that as a team to have that commitment around a particular appetite. What that will now inform is the how all this gets done. So we're looking at using the RASCI model, so responsibility, accountability, where the support comes from, how we consult and who we consult with, or who becomes informed along the process. Because now it's about, okay, so we understand what the opportunity for our organisation sits for us to improve our psychological health and safety. We know that the best way to do that is going to be through an integrated approach and leverage the strength that exists in our organisation. Now we just want to be as clear as we can be around where the accountability sits with that across the organisation, and where the 50% sits from a functional and an operational perspective. That's the space we're in right now. So I'm really excited by that opportunity, because at the heart of what we do is our people, and our purpose is very clear. What we're going to try and avoid is introducing a perceived bureaucracy around an area where people may not be comfortable or familiar, that we're able to help them understand that psychological health and safety is part of meaningful work. It's just how that's done and who delivers that as an organisation and in an organisation.
Yeah, so can we talk a little bit more about the RASCI? Can you tell us a bit more about the intent behind that?
Yeah, so just to, frame the context of the RASCI, if we look at our risk appetite, we are looking at a question of who, if we had to deliver psychological health and safety education and training across our organisation, firstly, where's the primary responsibility that going to sit? We have our learning and development team. We have technical experts within my team for health and safety, and we've got business partners at PNC that also have a degree of expertise. We have employee relations. So the question I'm asking is, well, who's going to be responsible for the delivery of education? And does the expertise actually sit within our organisation? Do we need to consider partnering with a specialist training provider? And so having clarity around our risk appetite just helps guide where we will start. So, for example, in the area of psych health and safety education, we're choosing to adopt a cautious approach. And that will be a cautious approach in the delivery of whole organisational psychological health and safety education. And we remain open, and these are the language we use around our risk appetite statements, but we remain open to delivering psychological health and safety program to individual business units. So there'll be pockets across our organisation that will be sitting at different maturity levels. So we are going to then be prioritising how we deliver that. So that needs to then ask the question, well, how do we inform those particular groups around that expectation for educational training across that business unit so they can effectively plan and resource for the delivery of that with the competing goal of operations. So I hope that helps with the RASCI. I'd love to give you more and the listeners more with that, but this is the opportunity we have in front of us to flesh that out, and we'll be working with Flourish DX around helping us with that, because I think one of the limitations we have as a team is we would like the RASCI to be aligned with the standard for psychological health and safety. So what we recognise is we're going to need help in someone challenging us around the blind spots that we have on key areas that our organisation will need to be focused, as opposed to just assuming training is just a thing we should be doing. Well, there's more to it than that. It's around who's setting our organisational objectives and how is that going to be set, and how do we set the barometer for the type of targets and the ambitions and goals we want to achieve through our psychological health and safety. Yeah.
Yeah, it's I think it'll be useful for our listeners to hear from someone who's a little bit further along than most organisations, and sort of giving them a heads up as to some of the future things that they'll need to think about and manage as well, I guess. So what are the next steps then? How do you see Lifeblood moving forwards?
Yeah, well, pleasingly, we're not starting from scratch. So we have momentum, which is really valuable. So at the moment, we're still delivering on the psychosocial risk management toolkits. And as I mentioned, they are heavy. There's a heavy resource drain from this because they run for 12 months, and beyond. So there's a fair bit that sits within that. At the moment, facilitation of those toolkits is having a positive impact on the local teams. So we are trying to look for like a more sustainable way in which that can be delivered across our organisation. Hence looking at RASCI. But for us, it's really around making sure that through that process of supporting each of the particular sites, that we're able to share the lessons learned. So we do spend a lot of time as part of those toolkits coaching the leaders. And so what we've found to be really beneficial is to help with leadership capabilities, we cross-pollinate those ideas. So we have the centres or the sites that have been through the toolkit will then partner with another site to try and create the cross-pollination of some of the learnings. Because I'll share this example. We had one local leader who, after going through the one of the toolkits, had this epiphany where they're in a role that they're quite hands-on. They enjoy working and being curious about the work that they are responsible for driving and creating. And they're about to approach one of the persons within their team, and just before they approached them, they paused and they said, look, they said to themselves, is now the right time for me to have a conversation with this worker who's doing work? And ordinarily, they probably wouldn't have been as mindful in that moment, had they not realised the potential emotional, cognitive and physical loading that one conversation, although well intended, but that one conversation could trigger. It's like a ripple effect. And so what we've found, it's been hard for me to label what the success of all this looks like, because when you look at the scores have improved, if you like, including for Affirm. If you look at the Affirm toolkit, we've been able to see a reduction in pain levels, reduction in musculoskeletal. Again, how valid and reliable those scores are for our site, I still question. I'm with an open mind. I'm not conclusive about these things, but what we have noticed is a shift in the way people are thinking. And so I'm asking more questions around leadership capability and culture and what it is we can do in the design of work for our leaders so that they're equipped to be able to navigate these sort of complex situations that present on a daily basis. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, it's a good point to call out there as well around the work factors for leaders and the design of work for leaders. A lot of the time they can be forgotten about sometimes. Our sort of frontline and middle managers can be a little bit of the meat in the sandwich, I guess, or they're being asked to deliver on these things for their teams, but then there's not, I guess, a lot of the time the same level of thought around how do we protect the mental health of our leaders, maybe isn't given the same level of thought or planning or consideration as it is for the frontline workforce. So, yeah, given that, I guess, the vital role that leaders play in actually protecting their direct reports, we do need to take that up the chain and make sure that we're really designing work in a way that is protective of leaders' mental health as well.
Yeah, you're right. And I mean, it's a privilege and a responsibility that leadership is. So, I don't take that for granted as a leader myself in the organisation and the community. But what we have found is that we are thinking about the role of culture and values organisationally as well. So I would point that out, and the significant ripple effect that can have, both in the decision-making of our leaders and people across our organisation and the behaviours that they show, which all influence the design of work as well. So it's a bit of a chicken and egg space. Yeah.
Hey, David, it's been a really interesting conversation with you, and I'm hoping our listeners find it as practical as it was intended to be. It's really great to hear, someone in the middle of this actually, talking through their process. We're close to the end of the podcast now, and one of the questions, as you'd be aware, that I like to ask all our guests is, if you were to look into the future, what are your hopes for the future of workplace mental health?
Well, I mean, I've been fortunate with my career, to look at the importance of health. And look, I appreciate health as mental, physical, and emotional, and that it is only one aspect of a person's overall well-being, as is work and career. Therefore, I think we should recognise that the workplace can affect the health and well-being of individuals, and for some, it has a material effect. And so, whilst I do believe individuals are personally responsible for their own health and well-being, I think work does have a positive role to play in health and well-being. And in this regard, I think employers have a responsibility and an opportunity to design good work that is good for health and well-being for those in their charge, and the ripple effect, of course, that can hold. And you look at our organisation and its ripple effect. So proactive and intentional focus on the design of work, I think, is really, really important, and knowing what work that is meaningful and aligned with the purpose or an organisational objective and brings out the best in people. And so you think about, a team of champions or a champion team, and you think about the importance of making sure that we create an environment that's conducive to high performance, as opposed to an environment that becomes a deficit for player development and performance. And so ideally, we're focused on finding better ways to support line managers so that they're able to understand and measure the variability of work, because ultimately not all of our work is predictable or linear. And to be able to do that, I gave the example of the line manager there, but to be able to understand the variability and the impact of that variability on work demands, and have the autonomy to be able to then design that work like that line manager did, to be able to make the choices to design or redesign the work in a way that does support productivity and bring out the best in people. So I guess when I look at it, the future of, for me, workplace mental health is an environment where we do bring about the potential in people with the common goal and purpose.
Yeah, and I think that's very close to my own description of what I believe is the gold standard around psych health and safety, right? Where we're taking that person-centered approach, but leaders have the capability, the knowledge and autonomy to make those decisions around work design, so that we are supporting people. Yeah, love it.
And words of advice for listeners who want to work in the area of psych health and safety.
Oh, look, it's been a wonderful profession for me. I've got a mutual benefit, I think, I'm sure of it. I do think the health and safety profession has evolved considerably since I started my early career and studies. The challenges, I think, and the advice I'd give is really be so from a personal lived experience, be really intentional in building capability for your own development and maturity. I think we're in roles of privilege where we can influence in an organisational context. So knowing your own emotional and social maturity, I think, is important. It's put me in good stead, I think, throughout my career in working in the space of human performance. Be intentional and curious. I think Dave Burrows said something like read lots and read lots. Look, I do agree with that, but I think the general curiosity about the science of work, to take from Dave Proven and Drew Ray, a lot of the conversation they have around the science of work, and particularly around the variability of work. So I tend not to make assumptions around the design of work. So I am genuinely curious, because I appreciate that work by and large can be quite variable. So being curious around human-centered design and all of those sorts of things, I think would be the other thing. And the third thing I would say is that's put me in good stead is just being comfortable noticing and navigating polarity, or the play of polarities in workplace. And I say that because it's helped avoid me become a frustrated health and safety professional, because what I've learned to do is become an appreciation of the complexity of work and the competing goals that organisations, individuals and teams might face. So, these are really, like the competing truths that basically play out in complex work environment, and just having an appreciation of how to navigate that. Would that be my 3 tips?
No small feat.
Well, David, it's been awesome having you on the podcast, and for you from sharing from your own practical experience. So thanks again for your time and your willingness to share.
Brilliant. Thank you.
All right, listeners, well, that brings us to the end of this episode. So remember, we do video these when we have our conversations with our amazing guests, and you can catch those videos on the Flourish DX YouTube channel. We also take snippets, the best of the best, and put them on the Flourish DX LinkedIn page. So follow over there. As well as a new safety exchange. So he's talking about David Burrows. David Proven. He's just launched a safety exchange platform, and you'll find that Joelle and I are contributing to the psych health and safety interest space. So you'll find more insights from Flourish DX there too. But while you're over on Safety Exchange or LinkedIn, feel free to interact with myself and Joelle if you want to continue the conversation. And David's friendly too. I'm sure he'll be open to you reaching out to him there too. But thanks a lot, listeners. We'll catch you next episode.
You've been listening to the Psych Health and Safety Podcast. To stay up to date with the latest on psychological injury prevention, follow Flourish DX on LinkedIn and subscribe to the Psych Health and Safety Podcast at www.psychealthandsafety.com.